But, you know, I heard about a lot of free stuff, but I didn't hear much about how he's going to pay for it or that there are any consequences to paying for it. You know, we pay for it, one way we pay for it is through debt. He was also bragging that he's reducing the deficit at a greater than any other president before him. But the interesting thing is he's going to add more debt to our country than all previous 43 presidents combined. So you got to wonder about the guy's sincerity. I mean, this is a guy who could only spin that he won the election of those who didn't vote. But that's sort of what I heard.
Back for hour 2 of America's Forum, Senator Rand Paul on the Fox News Channel, really with question 1 on the minds of so many American taxpayers this morning. Who's going to foot the bill for all the so-called freebies the president would like to hand out? Here to discuss the speech and the financial implications, and dare I say, perhaps get into a little math, Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He's the president of the American Action Forum, and he's the former director of the Congressional Budget Office. That's where I got to know him. Doug, it's so good to have you Skyping in from Washington this morning.
Thanks, JD. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you know, just like on those days in the Ways and Means Committee, we'd sit down and try to estimate what was going on. If the president got all these things done, there was no price tag. And I think one of the things on the minds of a lot of us, this so-called free community college. What is the ultimate price tag on something like that?
The president is proposing to spend $60 billion in, quote, free community college. And one of the best parts about it is he hasn't mentioned who's going to pay for it. In the end, he's going to claim the rich need to pay their fair share. But he's also made clear that states are going to have to pick up 25% of that. So $15 billion is a gift from the president to the states. Go pick up this tab.
So that money has to come in the form of taxation. And you mentioned a kind of backfill that the states will have to be involved in. So is this an example of trickle-down taxation, claiming he's going after the wealthy that in fact will hit just about everybody?
Well, the president's promising lots of free stuff, and there's no way that he can finance it just taxing the wealthy. He says this again and again, but he's already raised taxes on the wealthy. He's promising free community college. He also wants to have a much bigger handout in the form of tax credits, child tax credits, earned income tax credits, married working tax credits. He needs $320 billion in additional taxes for that. He just announced new housing policies, which are back to the kinds of things that got us in trouble with the housing bubble. We know who picked up the tab for that as well. So if you listen to that speech, it is detached from any kind of budgetary reality. And in fact, one of the things I noticed was he never once mentioned the debt. He never once mentioned that if you take the federal budget, put it on autopilot, and live out the dream that he has built so far, we have $1 trillion deficit in 9 years. That deficit is largely borrowing, paying interest on previous borrowing, and we're headed into a debt spiral. No mention of that problem, no solutions offered.
The other thing interesting about last night, Doug, is the fact that the president constantly talked about the middle class, talked about paying one's fair share. But while he made a scant mention of Obamacare, left silent was what? The 7 tax or fee increases that Obamacare is putting on the American people. How much of a direct drag or a direct harm or a direct cost will Obamacare be to the middle class?
The American people are picking up the tab for the medical device tax that shows up in higher costs for everything that they need for their medical services. They're paying for higher insurance premiums because there are taxes on insurance companies, because there are big mandates and regulations that force the insurance costs up higher. They've got a surtax on their payrolls and a surtax on their investment income. It is a litany of higher taxes and disguised taxes as regulations. And it's part of a really sad feature of the president's address. He talked about middle-class economics, but in fact, the middle class has suffered under his relentless higher taxes, higher spending, higher regulation approach. We've had the average household, the median household income decline during this recovery. We've seen real wages flat and not rising at the pace they should be. This is not a recipe for the middle class. In fact, his only plan for the middle class is to give up on growth and go try to take it from more affluent people and give it to the middle class. That's not been the American success story. That's not how we do business.
30 seconds remain. The good news is a lot of the announced stuff last night is not going to get through Congress, but let's just say it did. How much money for all the stuff he promised last night? Have you guys tried to even total that up yet?
It's not possible to tell. The president loves grand visions with not a lot of detail, but believe me, we've already got a price tag that's too big for us to manage. Now we've got new proposals from the State of the Union. All of this goes dramatically the wrong way. So mark your calendars for February 2nd when he puts out his budget and ask yourself, how's this going to add up?
You know, there's another date that Americans always circle, Doug. That's April 15th. When we come back, more with Douglas Holtz-Eakin, specifically the IRS. Back to discuss possible tax code reform, or at least tax reform according to the president. The former director of the Congressional Budget Office, current president of American Action Forum, Doug Holtz-Eakin. Doug, you would come into the Ways and Means Committee and you would sit down with those numbers and you'd try to explain stuff to me. I'm trying to understand what kind of tax code changes this president really wants to make.
The truth is, if you look underneath the rhetoric, this is a president whose tax policy is about picking winners and losers. That's not tax reform. You know that. I know that. Take, for example, his proposal that he launched on Saturday night, which says we're going to close a, quote, loophole on capital gains taxation and use it to finance a big expansion in government handouts. Well, that is a loophole if you make $201,000. It's not a loophole if you make $199,000. So if it's a loophole, it should be closed for everybody. It's either good tax policy to close it or it's not. He's picking winners and losers through the tax code again and again. He wants to raise the tax rate on capital gains to 28%. Why 28? We saw Republicans and Democrats in a bipartisan fashion lower the tax rate in the 1990s because it was good for economic growth. So his basic message is, I'm going to do something that's bad for growth, and never justifies why he wants to go from 20 to 28. This isn't tax reform. Tax reform is broadening the base by eliminating all loopholes and lowering rates for everyone. This is him using the tax code to figure out who will win and who will lose in America.
Well, rhetorically, some of his supporters have claimed, hey, if we take the top rate on capital gains back up to 28%, that's where it was in the Reagan era. This kind of linkage by rhetoric, very different with the numbers. Let's go in a different direction. Suppose we knocked down the capital gains rate. We did what, back when I was on the Ways and Means Committee, we were able to work out with Bill Clinton, and we reduced the top rate on capital gains from where it sits currently. What would that do for our economy, Doug?
In the end, economies grow over the long term in a very simple fashion. You give up something now to save, invest, and end up with more capital, more factories, more equipment, or better factories and equipment through new technologies, or workers with better skills, you had some training programs, things like that. But in the end, the key is the return to saving and investment. If you lower the tax rate on capital gains and dividends, you increase the return to saving and investment, you improve those incentives. If you do what the president wants, you diminish that, and you hurt the long-term growth of the United States economy. There are really two important things to point out. When President Reagan taxed these dividends and capital gains at 28%, that was the top rate. That gets left out of the rhetoric. And if you look at the record of this president, the Congressional Budget Office, my old shop, every year has marked down the potential growth for the U.S. economy. Now it believes the fastest it can grow over the long term is 2.3%. That's just not acceptable. That means that this is the boom. These are the good times, and we should be doing better than that.
And so all this economic progress the president was touting last night is the new normal? Is that the way to say it?
He certainly seems fine with this. Let's have an economy that crawls along at an unacceptably slow pace, and when people get disgruntled, we'll just go take the money from those people and hand it out to the middle class. That's not a middle class dream. That's what no American wakes up and wants to see. They want to start in the middle class, work hard, and end up as one of those affluent people. And they want to do it on the basis of a job and an opportunity, not a handout from the government.
Doug, about a minute left, and I just have to get transition from policy to politics. This kind of platform going to be something Hillary Clinton could run on, or is this better suited to an Elizabeth Warren to continue the Obama vision?
Prior to last night, I would have said this is a Warren platform, but Hillary Clinton signed on to it very quickly via Twitter. It took almost no time for her to embrace the State of the Union address. I think that's very telling. Many people had thought she would try to say, I'm not the third Obama term, but evidently she's going to be. And it's worth watching just how much of this shows up in her stump speeches in the weeks and months to come.
Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Back during the days when I served on the Ways and Means Committee, you would come in and make sense out of the numbers and try to explain to us some public policy initiatives. Thank you for stepping in the breach this morning, trying to explain the taxation vision, or the, quote, reform vision of our current president. It's always good to see you, and we hope you'll join us again sometime soon from the American Action Forum. Thank you so much,
I appreciate
Doug.
the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. When we come back, we again turn the focus to national security. Ryan Morrow will join us. Is the biggest threat we face really climate change? Our Commander-in-Chief seems to think so. Stay with us here on America's Forum.